Good morning and welcome to Dateline New Haven. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make New Haven tick. We got an interesting one today. We got a woman today who is trying to get Connecticut aware of and ready to pass the ERA. Remember the ERA? Well, you might think I mean the Equal Rights Amendment, because actually that's back on the table too from a generation ago. But there's a new ERA in town. It's called the Environmental Rights Amendment. And it's kind of mind-blowing. It started in a place called in Montana, of all places, and now people like our guest today, Kimberly Stoner, are trying to add it to the agenda in their own states. Kimberly Stoner, welcome to Dateline New Haven, and thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You should find a microphone.
Yes, you should find a microphone.
Yes, thank you very much, Paul.
And so can you talk right in the mic? So
Yeah, okay, yes.
I'm still not hearing you.
You're not hearing me. Uh-oh.
There we
That's
go.
not good.
Okay. So, Kimberly, are you associated with a group that existed before? Did a group come together to try to pass an environmental rights amendment in Connecticut?
So it's kind of a complicated story. I am a member of the steering committee of C3M, the Connecticut Climate Crisis Mobilization, and I'm now also the director of advocacy for Connecticut NOFA, the Northeast Organic Farming Association of Connecticut.
And they're involved in this too?
They're both involved in this, yeah. So, but it's actually kind of a personal passion of mine. I also originally heard about it from through Quakers. I am a member of the New Haven Friends meeting, and I met a woman in Maine who was working on what they call in Maine the Pine Tree Amendment. So an amendment to the Maine state constitution that is a green amendment. That's what they refer to these as. And got really interested in it at that point.
When are we talking about?
So that's a couple of years ago.
So this has been
2 or
going on
3
for a couple of years, even though Montana really just happened recently.
Yeah, so Montana has had an environmental rights provision in their constitution since the early 1970s. So Montana and Pennsylvania both put environmental rights into their state constitutions in the period in the early 70s when most of
Earth
the
Day came out.
Yeah, when Earth Day happened.
But I didn't think of Montana as a hotbed of environmental activism.
It's a pretty interesting story. They had a constitutional convention in Montana in the early 1970s, and the environmental rights was a big and controversial part of that constitutional convention. And because in Montana, as you know, there's all kinds of mining and coal mining and gold mining and copper mining, and had been so much environmental devastation that people in the Montana Constitutional Convention said it's time to put people's rights to a clean environment.
What's interesting about that is, and again, just from a distance, my understanding was that those interests, the mining interests, would control the political process in general. Was the constitutional process a way to bypass what happens at a legislature?
Yeah, I think that's right. Yes, I think that it was more of a people's constitutional convention. So it was an opportunity for the people to take some power from the big mining operations that often controlled the legislature.
So let's fast forward to this year, 2023. Based on that provision in the Constitution, young plaintiffs in Montana, organized by adults, filed a lawsuit saying, based on the Constitution, they were being denied their right to clean air, clean water, and a safe environment that's enshrined in the Constitution because of climate change. So what exactly happened? They won with surprise. They got a court right in Montana to rule that their constitutional rights are being violated by the destruction taking place in the environment. So what does that mean specifically? What does it mean for the law there?
What it means specifically is that the legislature in Montana, as you noted, tends to be controlled by corporate interests. The legislature in Montana had passed a law that forced the environmental organizations, the environmental administration, whatever it is, the Department of Environmental Protection or whatever it's called in Montana, to ignore any effects on climate change when they were considering fossil fuel installations. And so what the Held versus Montana, that's the name of the case, what the Held versus Montana did was overturn that state law. And that's, part of what the power of constitutional amendments is.
What I love about people at all ages who are involved in your movement is you're so optimistic. And optimism is not less accurate than pessimism, right? There's some of us who think that being pessimistic about the chance for change in life or nihilistic about beauty and love, that's all silly and that truth is always ugly. And it's not true. We did have a civil rights movement. We do have gay marriage. We do have an arc of history that does bend toward justice. But, I look at something like this and I say, okay, they passed this. And even if the U.S. Supreme Court allows it to stand, all they have to do now, next time they want to pass this law, is issue some bogus report published by the mining interest-controlled state administration in Montana that says, okay, we've taken into account the impact on the environment that this will do, and we conclude that the net balance is positive. Am I right, or is there more teeth to this?
So it remains to be seen exactly how it's going to go through the courts. For one thing, it doesn't go to the U.S. Supreme Court. It goes to the Montana State Supreme Court.
And after that, it doesn't because some state issues do not go to federal.
Constitution. Yeah, it's a state constitutional amendment. So I don't know very much about the Montana Supreme Court, but I doubt that it's very favorable to environmental concerns. But
there are intellectually sincere conservatives, and then there are the intellectually insincere brand we now see being voted in, like when they try to overthrow who's elected to the Wisconsin or Michigan Supreme Courts, based on what results they want. If it's sincere conservatives, they'll look at that 1971 constitutional amendment and say, it says what it says, right?
Yeah, so that's what happened in Pennsylvania.
So it's worth fighting.
Yeah, so that's what happened in Pennsylvania. So it's not necessarily a conservative versus progressive kind of a divide. So,
well, the definition of conservatism would include preserving the environment.
Yes. Well, yeah. So actually, I just came from the Connecticut League of Conservation Voters and meeting this morning, the breakfast this morning, and David Bingham, who was being honored for his lifetime achievement, made a big point of saying that a lot of the people who were critical in Connecticut in getting the Connecticut Environmental Protection Act passed were Republicans.
And of course, talking about Stuart McKinney, the old congressman, like a senator, that was a different kind of Republican, actually out of Teddy Roosevelt. The progressive movement and the environmental conservation came out of Republicans. So it's not completely, it's an important thing. It's like saying Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, so therefore the next 170 years of Republican politics didn't happen. I mean, there was a switch, right? Republicans used to be the party of conservation. The Democrats were not, because they came from blue-collar industrial areas, and they did a 180 in both directions, right? Like the Bingham family's the best example, right? The Bingham family were those old Republicans who would be hounded out as rhinos now. I'm
not trying to.
Well, maybe you're saying don't make assumptions about people.
Yeah.
Deal with
right.
the issue.
Yeah.
Like
so,
that.
and that's, that's completely my approach to this environmental rights amendment is it's hard to take a public stand against the right of the people to clean and healthy air, water, soil, and environment. So I think, I don't know how that's going to play with Republicans, but I intend to talk to Republicans as well as Democrats and anybody else. So, yeah.
And we're talking to Kimberly Stoner, who's a driving force in Connecticut to get an ERA passed. Not the Equal Rights Amendment, though I have a hunch she might be for that as well. It did pass here. But an environmental rights amendment to our state constitution what would it do?
So, again, it would put these rights into the Bill of Rights in the state constitution. So it would put powerful protection into the Constitution, regardless of what happens in the future. So,
I mean, specifically, what's the language?
So the language, I have the language right here. I can read it. It's a little bit long.
Go for it.
Each person of the state of Connecticut shall have an individual right to clean and healthy air, water, soil, and environment, a stable and safe climate, and self-sustaining ecosystems. The state, including any political subdivisions thereof, shall not infringe upon these rights and shall protect these rights equitably for all people regardless of race, ethnicity, tribal membership status, gender, socioeconomics, or geography. The state shall conserve, improve, and protect Connecticut's natural resources and lands, including but not limited to its air, waters, flora, fauna, soils, climate, and ecosystems for the benefit of all people, including present and future generations. The rights stated in this section are inherent, inalienable, and indefeasible, are enforceable without implementing legislation, and are among those rights reserved to the people and are equivalent with all other inalienable rights.
Okay, it's a mouthful, but it's really clear. And I get a sense at the end what you wanted to avoid was any kind of lawsuits like we're seeing now at the federal level against the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and environmental agencies that says the executive branch is overstepping its authority to carry out goals that might be in the Constitution and didn't have a specific law written for them. You have written at the end of that paragraph you just read that you don't need specific laws to carry this out.
Right. And that's what gives it the power to overturn the bad legislation like happened in Montana.
I want to get to the skeptical arguments people have against these, but first I want you to tell me a little more about where you're at with this. You don't just get to change the Constitution overnight. What has to happen?
So a version of this was introduced in this last state legislative session. It got a lot of support. We have like 42 organizations that have signed on in support of this. It got a public hearing, and that's as far as it went. It didn't ever get to a vote in the Environment Committee. So this year, what we're going to try to do, and I have a petition that I'm working on, is bring it to the Government Administration and Elections Committee because they have to approve any constitutional amendments. And then it will also go to the Environment Committee. It will go to the House and the Senate. They will vote on it. If it passes both of the houses with 75% of the vote, then it would go to a referendum. If it passes with less than 75% of the vote in both houses, then it comes back and it has to go through the state General Assembly again. And then if it passes twice with a majority both times in both houses, then it goes to a referendum.
And that's what we did with early voting.
That's what we did. Exactly. That's what we did with early voting. It can be done. It took a long time with early voting. But by definition, anything that happens is possible to happen again.
And it took a long time to wreck the environment. It'll take a long time. We have a long time we're looking at about what the effects will be. So a few extra years is probably worth it in the trenches, right?
Well, and I think it takes care of a lot of possibilities, as we were saying. So the Montana, Pennsylvania environmental rights passed in the 70s, and then they are still protecting the environment in Montana and Pennsylvania 50 years later. So, it has.
And it is the kind of issue that does belong in the Constitution because it's about fundamental rights.
Yes, actually, yeah. So
it guides what kind of legislation you pass. So what did you hear when what did people ask you, the legislators, when you had this hearing? What arguments did you hear for and against?
So arguments for is that there are a lot of gaps. There in the last legislative session, there was a huge effort, which was very important, to pass an improvement to the environmental justice laws. But the environmental justice laws still have lots of gaps.
And you're talking about like parts of the city, like cities where more people are congregating, people of color, which have the worst air pollution, like where I-95 and I-91 meet, that kind of thing. Is that what you're looking for at the environmental justice laws, or it's where waste is dumped, or where power plants go? So
it regulates all of those things, but it applies only to distressed municipalities or distressed census blocks. And New Haven is not necessarily a distressed municipality.
The horrible news is our economy got a little better, so we're right over the line of what a distressed community is. So now, even though we have just as many pockets of poverty, they can now cough and get asthma because we make too much money in other parts of town. Yeah.
So, so there's a provision in there about that the state DEEP may not it may refuse a permit in overburdened communities, and certainly New Haven is an overburdened community. But if we're not a distressed municipality, it doesn't apply to us.
And DEP is Department of Energy and Environmental Protection.
Right.
So, Kimberly, let me throw at you some things opponents say.
Mm-hmm.
One thing is that it's very fungible about what actually can document is the cause. Like, we know man-made factors have caused climate change. We know that other factors have caused climate change. The climate has always changed. People have contributed because of our burning of fossil fuels and like methane from cows and industrial agriculture. Can you really accurately put your finger on what is causing long-term environmental damage? Even if you know that smokestacks make you cough and they can give people asthma, can you really document scientifically what each individual source of climate change is when you're making these decisions? Like, if you're going to say, should there be a wind farm off Bridgeport's harbor, like, can you document?
Well, so I'm a scientist.
Tell me about that.
I'm an entomologist. I have a PhD in entomology.
Is that ants?
That's insects, all
Okay.
insects. And most of the time I worked on the last 10 years or so, I worked on bees, actually. So
I
that's
think
a whole other story.
Ants and bees are like the most fascinating creatures in the world. Like, haven't you spent like endless, well, I guess you do for a living. Like, we've all spent endless times watching ants carry chicken bones and stuff. You know, it's like how they work as a team is just bizarre, and how the male bees like just live for the queen, and then they get like clobbered while she keeps living. All the honey gets made. You know.
So
I just think they're fascinating.
they are fascinating. There are bits of that are not entirely accurate. But
I'm sure
not
it's
gonna
completely
get too deep
inaccurate.
in
I'm not an entomologist. I'm just someone who watches them do stuff. Yeah. Which part is inaccurate? The bees?
So the male bees are not doing any work. All they're doing is servicing the queen, mating with the queen. It's the worker bees, the female bees, that are doing the work. Yes.
Like in human beings, the women do the work and the men get the credit.
Yes, I often make that joke when I was giving talks.
So
about
what do
bees.
they do? What do the male bees do?
They hang out. They drink
Why?
some nectar. They
What's their function?
mate. Their function is to mate with
they
the
sit
queen.
around and it was time to mate. Okay.
Queens.
And then, so it's really a class issue. So all these other worker bees aren't unionized, and they're in the hive, and the queen's power is just like monarchical.
Yeah, the queen controls them through hormones, actually.
Well, what about the ants? They're brilliant. Like, you have the scout who sends out where you can get in and you get that food, and they get so many of them carrying little chicken bones that are huge in their world, you know.
So
I just remember when with chicken bones, we spent an hour watching chicken bones. You know?
you're pretty fascinated by chicken bones. Yeah.
Well, they were tiny, tiny bones like this, but they took like 50 ants to come and get them. Yeah.
Yeah. So actually, there are lots of species of ants, just like there are lots of species of bees. Actually, I should say there's. I'm about to publish, along with my colleague Tracy Zarillo. There's like 378 species of bees in Connecticut.
Wow.
And she's the lead author. I'm just helping out. But so not all the bees have that structure, and not all ants have the same structure either. Sometimes there's like multiple queens. Sometimes there's all kinds of different variations. But
That's it. And then the bees are why a lot of bees are dying off, and honey's really expensive, and we're not getting as much honey, and there's as much pollination going on. Is that correct, or is that also not true?
So that's not actually entirely true.
Well, you're debunking all my entomological reality here.
Yeah. So we have actually somewhat more bees in Connecticut than we had before the famous colony collapse disorder in 2006 and 2007. And that's partly because so many people are worried about honeybees that they think the thing to do is to keep colonies of honeybees. Actually, I'm much more concerned about other bees. There are species of bumblebees that we used to have in Connecticut that are probably extirpated from the state. They
So
no
you're
longer
saying
live
that
here.
the environmental reasons for the threat to that one group of bees is the source of a much bigger problem that we should be looking at, rather than whether we get honey instead of tuna?
Yeah, it's bigger than honeybees for sure. Yes.
But then why is the honey so much more expensive? Like, I always buy what's his name's honey, the peace honey.
Vincent Decay.
Yeah, Vincent K.
Yeah.
Which I really
Vincent
like
K.
that honey. It's just quite expensive. And what do you think about the whole issue?
I can't really
okay, but is that an
speak to how
entomologist?
Vincent K.
Speak about
prices his-
speak about vegans. Okay, and I love Vince. He's great. He's an old hippie. But what about the issue about vegans and vegans? There's that whole I'm a vegan who does eat honey, and other people say that's bee vomit. You say, well, it's just passing through them, and they're slaves in those colonies. But other people say that's part of nature and actually helps them living, and it's a byproduct. Do you have, as an entomologist who actually knows what this stuff is, rather than those of us who just talk about it, is bee vomit something that is it bee vomit?
It isn't really bee vomit.
Okay, but it goes through their body, right?
Yeah, so
but they're doing a good
process
purpose
it.
pollinating.
They say that one reason why honeybees produce honey is because they are metabolically active through the entire winter, and unlike a lot of insects that overwinter as dormant in some kind of dormant stage, they are metabolically active through the winter. They are actually heating up the hive through the entire winter, and they're sort of burning honey, metabolically speaking, in order to make it through the winter.
And again, this is the female bees, the ones who really do the work, not the males who are sitting around just
they
to
get
mate.
rid of all the male bees before winter. Yes,
That's good. Get them out. But what about the argument? Philosophically, should vegans be eating honey?
So I know some
Same
vegans.
thing as eggs and dairy.
So I know some vegans who do and some vegans that don't.
Right.
And I know also some vegans who say if we leave enough honey for the bees to be able to make it through the winter, then we can take some of the honey and eat it, so that the bees still have what they need. So,
Okay, that's a little bit the agriculture argument. What about the argument? Is it, if you're philosophically against animal products and animals, eating them, is it like eating an egg? Is it like eating dairy? Or is the idea that you're keeping a cow artificially pregnant all the time and, milking them, is that different from the bees having a natural process? Or is the milk just like the honey?
So,
is it morally and
I'm not
ethically?
a vegan, by the way.
I know, but but you can think about the moral and ethical arguments. Do you see them as parallel or not? That's the whole nub of the issue.
My understanding of vegan philosophy about dairy is that you kill off the calves so that you can have the milk.
That's one of the arguments.
Yeah, and so you're not killing off bees if you're doing this thing where you only take the honey where.
But are you
when they have
enslaving
enough.
them?
Well, this is what they naturally do.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Whereas the cows aren't naturally laying eggs. I mean, chickens aren't actually eggs all the time. The cows aren't naturally having milk all the time, right?
So cows are naturally having milk for their calves,
But not.
and the chickens would normally mate and produce fertile eggs, and instead we have all these eggs that are not fertile.
Is it an animal product, honey, or is it an animal byproduct? That's actually a crucial question. I'm finding out if I'm going to hell or not, basically. So that's why I'm asking these questions. It's a little bit personal.
Yeah, this is not what I expected this interview.
Well, you want to do the environment. We're doing the environment. Come on.
I guess I would say it's an animal byproduct. I mean, because you're not killing bees.
And is the honey part of the bee, since they processed it in? Basically,
They
they're
do
processing
process
it with their bodies.
But
is it the same thing as processing an egg in your body, or is that different? The milk, because they're actually producing it rather than processing the egg in the milk, right?
Oh gosh.
Okay, you know what? I'm going to talk to you about. You really came here to about Kim Stoner, who just impressed me with how much science she knows. She's helping lead state efforts for an environmental rights amendment, the new ERA, that would enshrine in our Constitution a right to clean air and water, and so that we can save future generations from the deadly effects of climate change. Fair way to put it.
Yeah, I think that's it.
So you're going to continue the campaign the next time. So another argument against these efforts are the unintended consequences argument and the what science doesn't know yet but would know later argument. So in the 1970s, when Montana was passing this and Pennsylvania was passing this, a key crusade of the environmental movement was to stop nuclear power, right? And say that you could never bury it forever. The byproducts is dangerous. It's hurting the earth. And now many environmentalists, including the Environmental Defense Fund, its leader Fred Krupp, have embraced nuclear power as the clean energy, because it was first environmentalists who came up with promoting nuclear power. Then it was the environmentalists who led the efforts against it because of the really harmful, not just the meltdowns and the Chernobyl effects of the 3 Mile Islands, but the very fact that for hundreds or thousands of years you're going to have it buried underground. But then there was a 180 again with half of the, I'd say, I don't know what the real numbers are. You would know, Kim. A real good chunk of the environmental movement is now embracing nuclear power with the right safeguards and the technological advances as an alternative, especially to fracking, but also obviously coal, as you want to fade us out, and fossil fuels. So given that, and again, I'd like you to correct my science as you did so well with the entomology, which was actually kind of hilarious, I thought. But anyway, how wrong I had everything there about the ants and the chicken bones and the bees. But am I wrong about that narrative? And if I'm right, and again, I'm doing devil's advocate here, I actually have to admit I would vote for the Environmental Rights Amendment in 2 seconds. But, for people who have arguments against it, they say, look what happened to nuclear power. When you have these decisions you're trying to make based on what the science is now, you're understanding it now, 10 years later, you might find you're 180% wrong because science is more complicated. And look at, was this like nuclear power when you're saying we want to use this amendment to stop certain kinds of fossil fuel production?
So, that's a complicated question. I would say that the rights are the same over time. The rights, your right to clean and healthy, healthy air, water, soil, stable climate. All those rights are essential to human life, to the life of the environment, and they remain the same over time. As science changes, and we discover new things over time, sometimes our interpretation of what is a threat and how we balance the different threats may change over time, but the rights remain the same. So I think, having a statement of the rights actually makes perhaps more sense than fighting on the same level for a whole lot of specific regulations, because we're establishing the fundamental principle, and then that will get interpreted.
I find that answer so strong, because then once you have the parameters with which we're working, we're making a statement in our Constitution about what we value, that can even have us look more closely into the research of different energy sources, like, before we embrace fracking, realizing the poisons it's keeping in the going to seep into the groundwater, that this might actually be an incentive to make smarter decisions. Absolutely. If we have these statements of purpose. Yeah. So what was really said against it why didn't it get up for vote?
So mostly people said there are all kinds of, we don't understand what it's going to do, and there may be all kinds of unintended consequences. So that was a big argument.
Did they give examples? Because that's a fair argument, by the way. And you're amending Constitution. It's not like you're passing and repassing a law year to year. It's a lot of work, and you want to think about it carefully. Deliberative process.
It's a big, broad, bold stroke for sure. And I understand that. So people argue that all industry, all commercial development will stop, because how can we do any of those things?
That's just fatuous. That's just a front for saying, we don't want to have any rules on us or restrictions, right?
Yeah. Well, so it means, if we had the Environmental Rights Amendment, then people would have to do their industry, and they would have to do their commercial development in such a way that it's not going to infringe on people's rights to.
Okay, we're okay with that.
A healthy environment. Yeah. And also the folks who look at what happened in Montana and Pennsylvania and New York. I should mention New York. New York passed their own Environmental Rights Amendment in 2021. People who have looked at what has happened in those states have not found that it stops all industrial and commercial development.
It's such a heavy lift to stop private interest that you kind of need 5 of these amendments to even make it a level playing field, right?
It gives people more power, yes.
Yeah, okay. So we're talking about giving people more power. So Kimberly Stoner, before I let you go, tell me how you got involved in this work. So you've been an entomologist, you've been involved with science, you're at the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station. You still there?
I am emerita now. I retired in June of
Congratulations.
last year.
After 25 years?
After 35 years.
That's a great place.
Yes.
And the work you do there is so great, you know. And so is that how you got involved in environmental activism, or did it go the other way around?
So I would say it went the other way around. I've always been interested in the environment, and I did some policy work when I was at the experiment station. I was involved in the state law that made neonicotinoids reduced, restricted use pesticides, so that homeowners couldn't just like buy imidacloprid and put it on their lawns. But that was a very different policy experience. I was like invited in by the Environment Committee, who wanted to figure out like how to write the law.
Fun.
So
that's so great.
That was really a lovely experience, and very different from like coming in from outside and trying to get.
Then your place gets real busy every fall when they're like, if there are mosquito diseases, right, like West Nile and stuff. Everybody looks to the ag station to tell us.
Oh yeah,
where it is and what to do about it.
Yeah, the experiment station is very involved in mosquitoes, and West Nile virus and Eastern
equine. We don't hear
equine
much about
encephalitis.
West Nile anymore.
So they do test mosquitoes. You're not probably seeing the press releases that come out on a periodic basis from the experiment station with what towns they've found West Nile virus and Eastern equine encephalitis, which is in somewhat in Eastern.
Well, this is a
Connecticut.
week every year. We're in it now, where Jews eat all their meals outside, and some of us sleep in the Sukkot.
Right. Yeah.
And it was about when the West Nile hit. There was this debate based on Agricultural Experimentation Report that it was actually against Jewish law to eat outside that year because of the threat of West Nile virus, especially old people would die. We haven't heard anything like that since. That one year when they found him in New Haven, we didn't follow it. Not everyone agreed with that, but like they did worry about the netting. They did worry about people who are older. And we're not, but whereas now I'm hearing more about like malaria coming back and the new resistant strains of that in Africa, and even the netting doesn't work. That seems to be
that's
the biggest,
a huge thing.
That's
worldwide.
the biggest problem. Yeah,
that's worldwide. It's a huge problem. Yeah.
So it was before you worked for Ag Station that you were concerned about the environment and involved in these kind of issues.
Yeah, when I was in high school, I was the president of the Protect Your Environment Club.
Oh, right. What year was that?
Oh, gosh. What year was that?
What year did you graduate high school?
1975.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were part of the anti-nuke stuff?
No, I was more involved in recycling. So we were collecting newspapers and recycling them. And
now, is your heart breaking about recycling now that it turns out all this recycling we do is ending up in like poor neighborhoods in the Philippines, like people's street? I mean, really, NPR did this.
Plastics.
Is our stuff even really being recycled, or is it all just a game?
Not
a charade?
very much of it's being.
So what are they doing? Why are they doing it? Why are they picking up our trash and pretending to recycle it?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So we have to turn off the tap. We have to instead of trying to recycle it, we have to stop using so much plastic.
Well, so like the energy stuff, right? Like, is there any real alternative to using less energy, which is a really hard sell, right?
Yeah. So with energy, people have studied it, and they have found that it's feasible to run our economy on renewable energy, on and also wind, water, and solar.
And also using less. I'm talking about like having the buildings that are designed to need less energy, to just not drive as much, to not, do more stuff by hand. I don't know. And also what you're eating. If you're eating stuff that you can compost, you're leaving a different footprint from having heavily produced and shipped commercial foods, no? Right.
That's true. And it's also true that, how it's packaged matters and how it's produced matters. I mean,
so what are we going to do about recycling?
So,
I get your point. Let's use less. But until we change how everybody in the world operates, except for 5 of us, what are we going to do?
So there were bills in the state legislature last session, which didn't go anywhere, that were extended producer responsibility, which said the people who produce the plastics are going to have to take it back and figure out how to deal with it. That didn't go very far. We have extended producer responsibility for some things like tires and paint and mattresses and things, but
But then people like me are going to have to be more consistent then and not use no-stick pans, because that's just as bad, right?
Oh, that's PFAS. That's really bad. Yes, so that's a huge
I just
issue.
hate the way that I can't clean the other pots. You get addicted to these conveniences, and they're really bad for the earth. But if Kimberly Stoney succeeds with her allies in convincing Connecticut to pass an environmental rights amendment, maybe we'll start to turn the tide. How can people get involved, Kimberly?
So right now we have a petition that is on our Linktree, which goes to the key legislators who need to introduce this in the Government Administration and Elections Committee, because if it doesn't go there, it won't go anywhere in the next session. Mm-hmm. And then we are having trainings for people to learn about how to advocate. So we're having a training. We're actually having a Zoom webinar tomorrow about green amendments across the country. And we're having a training on November the 1st for Connecticut activists to learn how to advocate for the Connecticut Environmental Rights Amendment in our own state.
Is there one stop shopping place on the web where they can do the petition and sign up for the training? So
the best place to go is the Linktree, which is Linktree CTERA. And that we keep putting up new things on there as we get new resources and we get new things that we're working on. Another important place to go is the ctnofa.org, which is the Connecticut Northeast Organic Farming Association. And I have a page, an advocacy page on that website, so you can look at all kinds of things.
Okay, so know where to send people.
Yep.
ctnofa.org and the link tree for the ERA. Mm-hmm. Keep up the good fight, Kimberly Stoner.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks for schooling me on bees and ants and the future of our planet. Thanks to Nora Grace Flood, who is doing amazing work, stepping in for Harry Drost as the producer on this program. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day, all night, and all week long at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.
Georgia man, I've been too busy to text.